Hi, my name is Benedict for Higher Hertz. In this video, we're looking at Foul Tilter. Oh, sorry, this isn't a poor Lord of the Rings clone. We're on a little bit of a jag looking at the rest of Tal's product line. I'm generally pretty positive about Tal's stuff. He does what he says he's going to do. He does his updates. It's good material. You can do an awful lot worse than using some or all of Tal's lineup if you are not happy with or do not have quality devices as stock in your door. Just bear in mind, though, of course, and nothing against Tal, but bear in mind that, of course, if you have a decent door, let's say Logic, for example, I see commonly people are going, oh, but Logic's things, I need to get something better, and it's like, Logic's actually known for having really, really good devices. Like, Reason has really, really good devices. So if you're thinking, oh, well, I have to go somewhere else to get goodness, it just means you kind of haven't got that for yourself. But Tal's devices sometimes are fairly stock, but increasingly he is bringing out new versions, and this is relevant here, which are making them unique and also making them more usable. Filter here is one that I have never touched, because whenever I looked at it, I just felt like, yeah, there's nothing for me here. Now, bearing in mind, in Reason, a lot of this stuff has been a lot more doable. Well, really, from the beginning, a lot of it's been more doable, but as the years gone by, a lot of these sorts of things are already set up, or it's easy, if you're prepared to do more than, 2 seconds work, to actually set up something to need. But this version does bring something nice. So, here is something that's toweled. We've got a nice moving, sweeping pad here. Get rid of all the towel devices? Not so charming. Now you might say, oh, but why didn't you use one of Tal's synths? I wanted to show the difference, because obviously Reason's synths are very, well, honest. There is no trying to make them seem sweeter and nicer than they are. That's my job, the mix engineer's job, the record producer's job to get that happen. So it's a stronger contrast. If I use one of Tal's synths that already sounds lovely and warm, the contrast is not as dramatic. So if we pull them all out, we have one instance of Filter doing a wobbly thing with regards to panning and I think possibly level. Let's have a quick look. Yeah, it's volume, but it's done in stereo, so it becomes panning. So it's a tremolo, but it's a stereo tremolo, therefore it becomes a panner as well as a tremolo. Stereo tremolo. And then a filter, which also has a stereo offset. So combine the two, and our static and screechy sound now has nice movement and sounds a lot more pleasing. An instance of Tal's chorus, which I covered. It is what we might say, simplistically, that perfect Juno chorus. It's not a thing that I love doing because it's just too easy to go perfect Juno chorus, but it does it, well, pretty perfectly. Then Dub X, also done a review on this. I'd like to see a new version of this. Isn't as usable as I'd love it to be, but it does sound good when you get it right. And then this is worth a moment's time. Tal Reverb has gone to 4. I did a review on this, the last version, and while it is effective, I didn't love it. I didn't think that it was as usable as it should be. Whether Tal paid any attention to what I said or not, I don't know, or even particularly care, although it's kind of cool if he's like, yep, I heard what you said. But he's now expanded it and given us more access to things, and it becomes a really intriguing delay with the ability even to tune the reverb. So it's a reverb, but the ability to tune the reverb so it can have a pitch-shifted version of itself flying in. How much one might use that, I don't know, but I've used it here because it's interesting. So now it's become a far more evolved device than it was before, and far nicer and easier to use, far easier to control, even though there are more knobs and buttons. So big cool on that towel. So bear in mind that I'm not using the filter here at all. Normally you would be starting with a sound that probably had some kind of filtering happening before you. But see how we're still getting some really nice build. So in terms of what the filter does, it's not actually a replacement for a classic Minimoog filter. It's got a different purpose. You can have it sort of do that, but it's really designed for a different purpose, which is movement, what you hear me doing here. We will kill this fella off, and then we'll start to look through it after we've looked at Tal's site. Now, I've looked at Tal's site so many times, so it's hard to come up with a different way of doing it. The filter is actually one of his freebies. Therefore, there is no dollar cost, as there is no dollar cost for the Reverb 4 you just saw, and the Chorus and Noisemaker, which I reviewed, one of the first reviews I did for High Hertz, and yes, I'll be looking at the vocoder mighty soon. What you get in terms of value for money is great. Obviously, Tal's hope is that you're going to say, look, this is really good, this is helping me get where I want to go. Perhaps now I shall have a look at some of his bigger, fancier devices. And his fancier devices are better. They just do more, which is fair enough. It's exactly what we'd expect. Like his Chorus does virtually nothing. But if you go, okay, I like his Moxie, I like the cut of his jib here, then moving up to Tal Dub X gives you a lot more control than just the on-off of the Chorus thing. So good on him. He's a good developer who's developed a very nice sound and style, and really is improving. Like, you look at the video that I did for the Tal Reverb compared to what I just showed you, or what's on the ground now for free, and it really is beginning to be in the situation where he could say this is becoming a Reverb Pro or something like that. Much as I hate that kind of term, it is improved dramatically, and I have a lot of respect for that. The device itself. Okay, it looks an awful lot like this. Like most Tal things, you can resize it fairly infinitely. Cool, that's nice, it's simple. His devices are simple and vector looking, but I would rather something that was simple and vector looking and effective than something that's got far too much what's called skeuomorphism, which is attempting to look like an 1176 to fool us into believing that it sounds better than it really does. This is saying, how can I be functional? And Tal is getting better and better at the functional, which is great. People will go, oh, what about patches? Yes, there are patches. There is a default patch, which is what you see here. It resets it, so it does nothing. Great, that's exactly what we should have. You've then got patches split up into different functions, filtery things. Some of these may introduce a tiny bit of distortion. I hear it in the cans, you probably won't in speakers. Ooh, that's horrible in cans. So panning, level gating, as you see, is broken up into things that you can do with filtering, things that you can do with panning, and things that you can do with level. All relatively simple. There is not a need for more patches than this. This really is one where you should be getting in and doing your own thing. Whew, get rid of that flicker. Patches are there, but don't see it as flicking through patches is going to get where you need to go. You really want to get in and build your own thing. Now, we're obviously dominated by this big O MSEG thing. We can pan. We can adjust level. So when our MSEG's not really doing anything, it just becomes a static thing. Apply a 12 dB low pass, but not a 24, but that's probably part of the freebie thing. Apply a high pass, and then a band pass. You can also apply a nothing. Oh, that's not actually a nothing. It's doing something. Might need to RTFM on whatever that's supposed to be doing. But they're your basic functions as to what it will do. It won't do several at once, unless that's what that's doing, but I'm not going to get into it because I don't understand offhand what it's doing. It surprised me. I assumed it was a nothing because the little hyphen, little dash generally denotes nothing. So volume, or level to be more accurate. We can then set points. And we can set quite a few points and actually get a bit complex with them. We can control the overall depth, and this is a little counterintuitive to start with, but then it makes perfect sense, and his visual really helps you to get it. So we can set, by offset, it means where is the center of this thing, because this appears to be bipolar above and below the thing. So seeing this is the bottom, we need to raise that to make it audible. That means there is no difference. We're just louder and softer, which is like what we did before. So there's actually a fair amount of finesse there. Double click will reset things. If you're finding like, yeah, this is right, but it's kind of wrong in terms of ranges, then use your offsets. No doubt we will use them a little bit as time goes by. That is really a good thing. It's then rate controlled. You don't have a rate knob. Personally, I'd rather a rate knob, but this is a free device, and with some thought, you will still get generally enough where you need to go, but it is a limit, and I wouldn't mind having access to a free rate, but nonetheless, so be it. We can set tempo based, so if I change my tempo here, it will speed up. If I change my rate here, it will slow down. There's a little pop there, so we can soften that up. Cool. And then, of course, we can apply that to various different things, or that kind of panning in headphones is just uncomfortable. I won't get fooled again! Doesn't sound right, but it's essentially what was happening there. So the MSEG is the center of everything. We can click, double click, make points come and go, and we can obviously get quite a few of these things in here. And while that can sound terrible when you don't have a purpose, or if the core sound is not well suited, then we can still make some really wonderful movement. Go through 70s records and electric pianos, so Fender Rhodes, Whirlies, things like that, commonly have some of this kind of stuff happening. Let's make this seem a little bit more whirly-like. So now that little bit of shiver is really taking our sound that is, well, flat and giving it more vibrance. Okay, it's not the world's best whirly sound. That's better. Flat. While in many ways that's not noticed, it just adds a bit of movement, a little bit of grab to that sound. So that's a really, really important part of what this does. Let's just open that back up again and go back in here and, well, let's just hit default. So your rates are primarily here tied to the BPM. You can move to a dotted version, so that's note and a half, or a triplet, which is 3 in the space of 2. This does need to be running for it to do its thing properly. That is a limit of sorts. But if we're wanting to do the little bit of tremolo, using one of the other variations gives us a speed in between. You can't get to the where it feels right. You've still got to use a beat division. It's a limit, but it's free. By the time you get to that sort of thing, then maybe you're looking at other devices or whatever. I'm not going to put it as a negative here, but the fact that you do have to have the sequencer running, it's still doing its thing, but it doesn't seem to lock the tempo the same without the sequencer running. What the logic is there, I'm not sure. It's a little outside of what I expected. Again, I'm not going to bitch too badly about it, but you just got to be aware that it doesn't function fully until the sequencer is running. Now, I know a few devices that are like that, so it may be part of the spec and how these things go. Simply is what it is. Now, you also have, with some of these curves, the ability to offset your stereo. Let's push that down. Now you'll hear that our volume has now turned into a kind of pan. So now we can be a little more complex in the sense that you can't put them to different rates from each other, which would be entirely interesting, but if you've got any kind of modularity in your host, there's absolutely nothing to stop you from putting one device on the left-hand side, one device on the right-hand side, and setting them to different rates. And then you will have all kinds of interesting, but they're not going to wander the same as if they were free set rates. So being able to spread things out to stereo is pretty cool. You can do it on filters and the like. So little offsets can give you very nice little bits of movement. we've got nice movement. Obviously what's good is all dependent upon the piece. I would urge some caution of applying too much of this sort of stuff, especially pannings and things like that, when you are in the sound design composing phase, simply because if you do, you might actually be creating some real difficulties for yourself when it comes to the mix phase. I see people overdo their sound design trying to mix from the beginning, and they're trying to mix each individual sound to be the hugest ever. And while that may seem like super cool, now down the track we could have some serious difficulties actually making that find a place in the mix, especially if we're unprepared to let go of this thing that we've gotten ourselves attached to here. That can be part of how the sound goes, but you've just got to really make that distinction between, do I want the mix to work, or do I want this sound to be exactly like this? And sometimes you cannot have both. But this is what it does. That ability to offset is pretty cool, I gotta say. I do like it, and it's quite useful. Your filters, well, it's really all the same stuff. Well, high-pass filters aren't always the most charming of things. Even here, you notice that they add a subtle movement, both in stereo and just in timbre, that wasn't there before. That's the kind of thing that will really help enliven a sound in the mix. So before you go, oh, high passes are useless, well, not necessarily as much as you think. And you can do a kind of a phasery sort of thing. That's really quite nice. Now, obviously, you can finesse your input level and output level. I've generally been doing it here, but you can do it here as well. All good stuff. We've then got some things that are a little bit more complex, or shall we say interesting. We'll turn loop off for the moment. Nothing's happening. Runs once and stops. Now that can be very effective. What we might say is like, oh, okay, I want that to run at the beginning of a phrase. So if I've got my 4 bars looped here, I could say, let it run there, let it wait, let it run again. And that can be an incredibly effective thing in composition and mixing, because you create a movement and emphasis at a certain point. So we can draw attention to the sound here and then have it sort of settle into the background in the second half. Very cool. This defaults to having loop on, which is what most people are going to want, but don't be afraid to turn it off. Also, if you are wanting to use it to do things like more traditional enveloping, might be not entirely possibly getting a little loud. So you can set to trigger, no doubt automatable. Let's just check it. Trigger, yep, I've got a thing. Let's make a thing. So you see some wasted time there, but this is one of those slightly annoying situations where you have to understand how something works. Maybe if RTFM, maybe I would know, but it would be nice if this didn't do this. Why it's doing this, I'm not sure. But to work, you can see it needs to actually go through a transition point. So if I were to put this the way I had, which is just on, then it's not seeing any movement and it doesn't trigger itself, which is, of course, annoying because it's not what we wanted. We're playing, we've got signal coming in, and it's doing what we anticipate it's going to do. So to let you hear it happening over and over. So it does work. To make it work, you've just got to have an obvious transition in the automation. It may behave differently in different doors. The functionalities there is just a little not what I expected, which is a weakness, but it's one of those things. Hopefully it's reasonably explained in the manual. You've also got a MIDI mode. This I do like and I see as a real positive. Again, we need to be in play mode and we need to assign a MIDI track to this device. In Reason, it doesn't automatically get a MIDI track. I need to create one, and then I put in some notes. Whilst we've got that going, you hear nothing. So you can see it's triggering with these notes. Now there should be no difference, unless there's an undisclosed feature, there should be no difference with regards to see, so it's only taking a note on as a trigger event, which is exactly what one would expect in this situation. So using the trigger is probably not the best method of doing it. So if it's a little less than fully evolved, fair enough, because the MIDI is the better one to use to trigger, because it's much easier to see from MIDI notes. Now these notes wouldn't need to be these lengths, I should imagine, in which case if we shorten them up, see, short notes doesn't matter. All it's looking for is the gate on to say start your run, and then your timing will be based on this. Again, makes perfect sense, and I think is a good thing. In theory, it would be possible to take notes from your synth, put them over here, and then use this as a replacement filter, but you're not going to get the finesse that you're hoping for. But give it a red hot go, you will come up with an interesting result, regardless of whether it's right or wrong. It's an interesting thing to file away. So MIDI allows you to trigger when this starts, but you will need to send it the same notes as you're currently playing, which in this case would be me putting it into a combinator so that it receives the same notes. If you have some sort of combinator or grid type system where you can do those things, you shouldn't need me to explain that to you. It should become relatively self-evident. They're all the main functions of this device. It really comes to life more where you take, let's get rid of this. Let's insert another TAL filter. One of the downsides of being a reviewer, you end up with so much stuff. Sound like Elton John. Blah, 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 blah. Ballet, ballet. Wasn't my intent. So now we've got this one panning. The frustration here is that they are panning at the same kind of rate as each other, or the two are. So this allows a little bit of offset. You can apply that to anything. Obviously, I'm applying it to a pretty basic sort of a synth sound. If we turn this back to our electric piano type thing, I think this one's probably a little too excitable. Now I can see that sort of thing being applied very effectively in something. I would probably give it a little tiny bit of the old drive, not that much. And that becomes pretty cool. Let's pull in, actually for ease, just because it's going to be faster for me, let's pull in this guy. We've come up with something that's really unique compared to this, which is obviously not entirely unique. If we put our turn it back into a whirly type sound in the first place, let's just reduce our this guy on again. But that so we're starting to get that cool driven sound from the Rhodes. And our echoes, which smooth everything out. I wouldn't do that as a lead line, but something that sits inside the mix. It's going to give it a kind of cut and movement that's unexpected because it's doing, well, unexpected things compared to, if we leave all our effects in except for these guys, it just, well, it lacks funkiness. But putting in these, that then sounds intriguing. That's not a case of saying, oh, follow exactly what I've done and you'll be funky. No, you've got to find your own thing. That's super, super important. But the device is pretty darn simple. Legacy mode says to leave alone, so you only use that if you've already got an older version and you need it to behave the same as it did before. Obviously, the newer version does not. So good on him for giving something that keeps Legacy happening as he's moved forward. Oh, it's Telfilter 2 version 3. Fair enough, makes a kind of sense. If you want more control, then turn loop off and go with MIDI, in which case it needs to have a MIDI track. It needs to be running to be fully in control, and then the MIDI notes will cause this to trigger, as you saw or see. Oh, it doesn't have a MIDI track right now, so I'd have to create a MIDI track and then you should be able to see it trigger when I've got MIDI on. So you can see MIDI notes causing it to trigger. That's another way of setting up your own kind of timing. It's versatile enough, bearing in mind there isn't a free-form knob to set timing. But with enough care, you'll get something that works. The filters are TAL filters, so they sound nice. 24 dB might be nice, but we're not going to bitch for the price. I forgot to run through the good and bad at the beginning, so I'll run through it now. I think it's all relatively self-evident. The good, that it is very practical and effective. It's pretty easy to use. It does what it indicates it's going to do, and does it well. Yes, the trigger automation is not the easiest, but it's not the most practical way of doing it. MIDI is more practical. The fact that it can take that MIDI note on is, I think, a really nice thing. That's a thing I would expect in Reason devices, but is not always so clearly offered in VST world, in which case that makes it a big tick from me, because I wouldn't entirely expect to see it there. It would be missed out, especially on a device in this level of the market and in the free end. Which brings me to the fact that it is free, and you get a very usable product, preferably not overused, but a very usable product for tremolo, panning, and similar sorts of things employing filters, including the stereoization thing, for free. That's very, very generous of TAL, and it's a cornerstone device. Not quite the same cornerstone as an Echo unit, but in terms of being a utility tool, then it is a cornerstone of that, and one that you could probably end up continuing to use through your whole life. And so that's why I think TAL's pretty smart in putting this out. In terms of negatives, well, the fact that it doesn't have a free rate is a little frustrating, but I'm the king of never BPM sync anything, so I'm going to bitch about that. Most people are not going to bitch about it, therefore it's not going to be written down. It's probably not entirely fair to bitch about too much. So ultimately my only negative really is a bit of a non-event, is like, well, it only does what it does. And that's fair enough. Why should we expect it to really do much more? I think it does a tremendous amount already. If you stop and work out how it works, and then apply yourself, just as I've applied the idea of, well, what if I do a bit of this and a bit of that? And I've taken that thing that struggled to have any presence or character and made it very playable, very touchable. Without it being necessarily incredibly obvious to anyone who's listening to it what I'm actually doing to get there. That's how you get magic. So it only does what it does, but if you know how to use it and you put the time into finding something special, then it's practical and very effective. Therefore, it's actually, I think, a real little winner, as are most of TAL's things. Now, if you have any questions, then pop them down below. Obviously, if they're about TAL, his site, his stuff, they are best going to TAL, because he is obviously support for, well, TAL. But if it's just about what I've talked about, and please make sure that you've watched what I've talked about, don't just ask me a question, then ask on down below. Oh, and if you're thinking of being mean like the other fellow was on one of the last videos, you will just be deleted. Because what you said you knew was rude, and you still went and said it anyway. And when I went and had a look to see what you have done to justify your right to be so rude, guess what I found? Nothing. You've never done anything. So if you're going to be opinionated, and I am opinionated, that's my job to a fair extent here, to draw conclusions and express them, then you're going to have something to show, or you will just be deleted, which is the appropriate response to have. Otherwise, grab this device. It really is a cool thing. It does some things differently from what I expected, and differently from things that I already have on board, in which case it does add to the usual stock devices, which is a win and exactly what Tal should have put down to make his device have any purpose being then greater than a Me Too, which I must admit in early days I just thought, oh yeah, whatever. So that's great. Get out there, play with it. Most importantly, have fun.